Thank you for coming.
You bet.
Give me just a minute here. My guest is retired Master Sergeant John Rogers. He was former readiness NCO for Service Battery 2, 146. Was S1 with Headquarters Battery 2146. You were, was it Troop Command?
I was, when we first got back from deployment, they moved me up to 81st Brigade S1. And then I went from 81st Brigade S1 to Troop Command S3.
Wow. He helped in the mobilization and deployment during Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003. This was the largest deployment of the Washington National Guard, but of the National Guard in wartime since World War II. Over 3,500 troops from the state of Washington were activated and mobilized on this deployment. The Master Sergeant aided in the readiness and retention of hundreds, if not thousands, of soldiers during his career. His soldier care and leadership in the Guard's transition from peacetime to wartime operations were exceptional. This man saved a lot of soldiers' careers in his process. Before we jump into the war side of things, gonna ask you some more laid-back personal questions. You're from California?
I am originally from California. I moved to Washington State right after my 21st birthday.
Were you a surfer?
I was not. I did not live on the coast. I lived inland in Northern California in the Sierra Nevada foothills.
What brought you to the Everrain State? Why did you give up all that sunshine?
Yeah, good question. I moved up here the 1st of January 1984, and I believe I counted 40 days straight of rain. I lived on the coast in Grayland. How I got up here was I was practicing martial arts at the time, and my sensei was moving up here to start a business and asked me if I wanted to come along. I did. Things didn't work out. He was on a personal level more of a flake than I realized at the time. We parted ways. I stayed in Washington. He moved back to California, and within 9 months of moving to Washington State, I was in the Army.
Wow, so you beat me to the punch on that. We were gonna get there, but that's wild. Now, did you become a coffee aficionado being here in this place? Did you end up having any like affiliation with drinking Starbucks on a regular basis?
No,
or did you manage
especially not in 1984.
Yeah. So it's late 70s, early 80s. What is John Rogers listening to on his radio? What 8-tracks did you own?
That's funny you should mention that, because I did have an 8-track in my car when I was in high school. Wow. What was Led Zeppelin for sure. Pink Floyd, The Who, Judas Priest. I remember blasting Breaking the Law in my car, sitting outside of school. Pretty much anything along those lines. And later, I kind of got into post-punk after I joined the Army, and was listening to Bauhaus and The Cure and things like that. And that was probably the peak of my musical consumption. And then I reverted back to Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, and I'm still there.
The classics never die.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, now jumping into the Army, did you have family that served in were prior service, or?
My father was Navy, and he was on an aircraft carrier during the Korean War, actually in theater. And his father was in the Army in World War I, and he was a cook. And then it seems like almost every one of my uncles was in the Navy, some of them Vietnam era some of them not. There was a lot of familial influence there.
Now you go to basic training. Where did you go to, and what was your MOS?
I went to Fort Leonard Wood as a combat engineer, 12 Bravo, and we were what's used to be called, it may still be, one station unit training, OSIT, where you keep the same drill sergeants for basic and AIT.
I wish I had had that, but no such luck. Mom, Dad, what did they think about that?
They were for sure supportive of it. I was 21 at the time, so I had been out of the house for a while, and my parents divorced when I was very young. I was raised by my mom. It was a bad economy at the time. There wasn't a lot of work out there, so I had an income. That was a good thing.
That always helps, especially in the 80s, because I remember working at the Nugget Casino in Fallon for $3.25 an hour, and,
Yeah.
and some of the waitresses' tips. I'd get like 10% of the waitresses' tips. So how much were you pulling down?
Oh man, I don't remember. I do remember in California, I think that the minimum wage must have been a little higher, because I think it was $3.35 if I remember correctly. I couldn't tell you how much I was making military back then. It was Reagan era. I do remember we got a huge pay bump, I think my second year in. Reagan and Congress significantly increased the pay rates in the military. So that was a big deal, but I still don't remember what it was.
No, were you in Desert Storm?
No.
Were you out by then?
No, I ETS'd in June of '88, and I joined the Guard right around the time Desert Storm kicked off, and they were pulling a lot of combat engineers out of the IRR, and I figured in hindsight that if I hadn't joined the Guard when I did, I probably would have been activated out of the IRR and sent to Desert Storm, because I was a combat engineer that had been out less than 2 years.
How did you find the Guard? What got you? I mean, usually once you get out of the military, it's like, yeah, I'm done. But what was the pull?
I was done. I wasn't planning on doing any more military service. I commercial fished for a while. I worked in the woods for a while. Then I met the woman who I would later marry, and she had kids. I did not. And commercial fishing and the logging industries weren't real stable. And I was looking for something with more stability, and I was looking specifically at apprenticeship programs, and I was trying to get into the operating engineers, and I went to the employment office in Aberdeen, and while I was waiting for my appointment, I found this clipboard with these job announcements for National Guard AGR, and I started flipping through them, and the fourth consideration group for hire was eligible for immediate enlistment. You didn't have to be in the Guard at the time you were hired AGR, but you had to be eligible for enlistment. You had to meet all the qualifications.
Wow.
So I asked in my appointment, and the person I had the appointment with didn't know anything about it and said, talk to a recruiter. So of course I talked to a recruiter, and they said, oh no, you can't get hired like that. You have to be in the Guard first, because they wanted credit for the enlistment. And I said, no, that's not what it says. And I'm not going to bank on that. I'm not rolling the dice. And I did some more research. My brother and I were working in the woods together up by Marysville on Mount Pilchuck. And while we were we were helicopter logging, so we were getting we had a lot of downtime when we couldn't fly. So we'd go show up, couldn't fly, we'd get show up time, go back to the trailer we were staying in this campground. And while we were doing that, I started filling out applications for AGR. My wife came up to visit one day. I gave her the stuff, said go make copies of all these things. And I put in 3 applications. I think I was called in for an interview on the 3rd one, and that was unit clerk in Service Battery in Centralia. And I went into my interview with long hair and a beard, and was hired.
Wow.
For this. Yeah, it was crazy. Hindsight being 2020, that was insane. And they joked about it for years afterwards. Oh, Rogers came in for his interview with long hair and a beard. It was funny.
You knew my recruiter, and my first drill, because I had those 6 drills before I left for basic training. I showed up with a goatee.
Mm-hmm.
And the look from all those sergeants. So I can imagine you were dealing with like actual NCOs, and probably was there an officer involved when they did your interview?
Major Duggar, Sergeant First Class Morker, Sergeant First Class Marvin. I think Robinette might have been there. He was probably, I don't know if he was an E7 or E8 at the time, but those were the people that interviewed me. And the funny thing about showing up at first drill, the first day, I'd been out almost 2 years, and my last assignment was in the 82nd Airborne. And the first day I was in the armory, I didn't have uniforms yet. I didn't have an ID card yet. I didn't have anything, but I still had to report. And one of the guys from the shop, Jimmy DeGeis, who I believe was an E4, came up into the orderly room and addressed Sergeant First Class Marvin as Neil. And I lost it. That was so alien and so foreign to me. I didn't know what and the shop guys had to wear uniforms under their coveralls at the time. So he was in uniform. I was like, what in the hell is this? You know, it was so foreign.
For those that don't know, in the Guard, on the technician status, you're kind of a dual. You're civilian, but you're also you're state and federal worker. So it's you still wear your uniform. You're paid at a different rate, but the standards are a little different in the shops. It might be John and Bob working with each other through the week, but come weekend drill, it might be Sergeant First Class Bob and Private Johnny. You know, it's a different world, and very confusing, especially when you come from an active duty environment into the Guard. So what was their response when they see you?
There was no response. I mean, I was off to the side in shock, and just trying to comprehend what was going on. I was like, is this what the Guard's about? It was pretty odd. I didn't know what a technician was at the time, of course. And
were they scared when you reacted, or were they upset, or were they?
No, they didn't even notice. I don't think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's outstanding. You get to Service Battery in, I apologize, what year?
1990.
1990.
Yeah.
Man. So you're still with the Peacetime Guard.
Right.
Involved with any of the forest fires or the floods?
What year did we go to Leavenworth? 94, maybe? That might have been earlier than that. I can't remember. We did go to Leavenworth. I was actually never out on the fire line. They had me doing administrative stuff, which is what I did during the week anyway. So I can't remember how long we were up there. 6 weeks, maybe.
Now, in this time, we're God and country, and I always ask, what is your faith, or do you have a faith background?
No, I really don't. I grew up bouncing from church to church to church with my mom. I didn't appreciate the culture because it seemed to me there was a lot of hypocrisy, and that's the thing I admire about you is you live your faith 100%. And I admire that greatly. I respect that greatly. I did not see any of that at the time when I was growing up. So that's probably what turned me off from the church at the time. And I guess now I'm an unapologetic heathen.
Right on. We love them too.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I appreciate that. I really do. I've explored a lot of different faiths, and nothing really just ever clicked with me. I don't know if I would technically even say that I'm a spiritually oriented person. But I 100% respect people who live their faith, who walk the walk, regardless of what religion or belief system that may be. And in the Christian faith, I guess I'd call them Sunday Christians.
Mm.
You familiar with that term?
Yeah.
And I apply that to any faith. That just doesn't seem legit to me, personally.
What brings you peace then? Because as we go farther on in here, what brings you peace in those challenging times? Because we're not even to the deployment yet. You have to deal with, especially in your position.
Mm-hmm.
You have commanders wanting ridiculous things. You have soldiers doing incredibly stupid things, trying to have a life at home, maintain that. There really is no such thing as a work and life balance when you're in the military.
Right.
But you have all those plates spinning. What's bringing you peace in those moments?
Back at that time, there probably was no peace. I would say later, as I started getting outdoors more, spending more time outdoors, camping, hiking, hunting, being out in nature.
I think a lot of our people will appreciate that, because I do like that saying, touch grass.
Yeah, for sure.
There's, especially when things are getting difficult, the power of a hike, or the power of sitting by the river, just whether you're casting a line or not, there's a lot to be said for that. And in an active duty military lifestyle, those are hard and far in between opportunities to get.
Yeah, for sure. And it got to the point in the Guard where I was probably more often than not working 2 weekends a month, plus the long hours during the day, plus the commute. And my wife had horses, which was another big demand on time. There just wasn't much time for anything, let alone getting out into the woods.
I was fortunate to be raised on a road where a lot of my neighbors had horses, so I got to ride with them a lot of times, but I never had that expense. I never had that upkeep. I know what the Army lifestyle is like, but then to come home and then take care of barns and stables and
Right.
and that,
Fixing fence, fixing water line.
did you get to sleep at all? Did you get it's like, man.
That's about it. Sleep was it. Thinking back, life was military and horses. That's all there was, pretty much.
There you go. So, and I apologize because you answered a lot of things that I was going to ask you, but you were there when the howitzers, the guns for the civilian folks watching, guns are what you call tanks. You were there for when the howitzers converted to the Paladins.
Yes.
And then
I think they went from A4 to A6, the 109s and 109s.
So you prepare soldiers' resources, all their information, medical information, all this stuff, to keep them in the systems, in the Army systems. And then peacetime, like I said, it's been a relatively smooth run, and 9/11 hits.
Mm-hmm.
What was that day like for you?
So I was up. My wife had the TV on. My wife was a TV holic. She had to have TV going 24/7, just for background and noise. I think more than anything, that she had the TV on the news. I think she was probably asleep. I got up, took a shower, was getting ready for work. I walked out of the shower, and my wife had woken up, and she said, "You need to look at this." And the first plane had already hit the tower. And as I looked at the TV, the first thought to me was, that's got to be restricted airspace. And when she said a plane hit the tower, I was thinking like a little passenger, two-seater plane, or prop plane or something like that. And as I looked at the TV, that's when they showed the second plane in the background getting ready to circle around and come into the tower. And immediately I knew it was a terrorist attack. Immediately. That just doesn't happen. So we're, needless to say, freaked out as the story unfolds. So I get dressed, I'm listening to the news on the way into the armory, and by the time I got there, and I lived probably a 40-minute drive from the armory, by the time I got there, they were already starting to put together guard rosters and things of that nature. All the doors in the armories were locked. We had armed guards, and it was insane.
It was, I think I've shared with you before, I kind of had the same experience. My mother had called, I walked out, was watching the TV when the second plane hit. I ran for the Centralia Armory. I kept mistaking you and Roger Lane, but right. I remember going up to the armory, and just the look on his face, I said, "What do I need to do?" And he says, "Get your bag ready." He goes, "I will call you if we need you."
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going back home and getting my duffel bag set for anything, for everything, and getting a call. I can't remember if it was that night or by the next night. I was doing the guard duty at the Centralia Armory. And then there was this big uptick for mobilization. At that point, I had got ran over, was in a wheelchair, was possibly looking at being discharged. But we're all up at Fort Lewis, going through all of our medical records, all that, and it goes quiet. They have us stand down. And it was like nothing for the longest time. Then, and I'm telling you from a private's perspective,
right.
We kind of don't know what's going on. We don't know what's happening. Then we get the second MOB order. But this time it's for a combination. I always tell folks it was we were in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom, and then ended up not going to either Afghanistan or Iraq. I realize some of our soldiers did,
Mm-hmm.
but the majority of us ended up in Kuwait, which at that time, and I know a lot of folks are like, oh, Kuwait, you got to stay at the Hilton. People were still getting killed in Kuwait when we got there. I
Right.
remember the contractors that got attacked out of the Doha gate, and I still remember seeing that wreckage when they had to push the vehicle off to the side so that people could still get in and out of the gate. Um, what was going through your mind in that whole process? You're like, you're taking a bunch of you're taking an entirely peacetime group who has now suddenly, hey, we are now a wartime unit. People are getting soldiers are getting DUIs, crazy lockdowns. People are destroying their careers in this mobilization to Fort Lewis, and you're having to you're having to herd cats through this whole process.
Yeah. So at that time, I was on the battalion staff. I was the NCOIC in the S1 section. That's my platoon sergeant time was behind me, and the rest of my time and my career was mostly on staff. But yeah, I think General Hillman was a brigade commander at the time. Our power projection platform was not supposed to be Fort Lewis, and he fought for it to get us to stay at Fort Lewis. And in hindsight, I think that was a bad move. I think a lot of that craziness wouldn't have happened because people wouldn't have been tempted by knowing the local area, being able to sneak home. And we were, out of the brigade, I believe we were the only battalion that was locked down.
That caused a lot of hard feelings.
It caused a whole lot of hard feelings. And that mentality by the leadership was maintained through the entire deployment. So we had that same issue when we were in Kuwait. There were a lot of Navy personnel at KNB, where I was. I don't know what you guys had at the S-Pod, other than...
We started with the Navy, but then I believe it was 81st took it over. Mm-hmm. Army had control of it after the Navy pulled out.
But the Navy were taking trips to town all the time, doing little shopping trips and things like that, which probably was not a good idea. Because we always traveled with weapons. We always had live ammunition, but the rule was you carried your magazine in your cargo pocket. There was a threat. And the going to town part, I think, was a bad idea. The restricting soldiers from being able to go to Arif John to an MWR event, and Arif John was, I don't know, probably 15 minutes from us. That caused a lot of heartburn. And personally, I feel that soldiers should have been able to and encouraged to go to that stuff. Because it was stressful. We were undermanned. There were long hours. People were going a little stir crazy. It was difficult. I remember you being angry, very angry, that whole deployment. And you came to KNB for a while. I remember that, and I remember having meals from you and you being very angry. During that period, I became very disillusioned with all of it. And I became very conflicted about what we were doing, where we were at in Kuwait, where I saw money being spent on civilian contractors and third country nationals. And with what we were as a nation doing over there in the first place, I was very conflicted over all of it. And that was kind of, mentally, that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. Prior to that, I, to a certain extent, bought into the whole God, country, and service thing. After that deployment, I didn't any longer. I thought it was a farce.
My good friend Chris Brewer was here yesterday, and we had this conversation of my friend Jason and I. We had that. We went over feeling like Rambo, wanting to take over take out the enemy, and came back like Hawkeye and Pierce from MASH.
Right.
It was that kind of that day after day. It's hard to explain to people who you had all the troops that went in and did actual combat or were in these combat positions, and we were basically security guards, MPs for Kuwait.
Sure.
And I never downplay the fact that we had the largest ammunition shipment since World War II. I still remember that whole process when that came, that ship with so much arsenal, and how we share the pucker factor was really high during that process, because if we were going to be attacked, that was the time that it would have probably have happened. But overall, the way that we were treated, living in the S-Pod, which is, I think at the time, was in the Guinness Book for the most polluted place on Earth.
Right.
And that's a whole nother story. People don't understand what it was like living with so many oil refineries. I think it was some sort of acid plant, hydrochloric.
I don't know what it was, but it was bad.
Sulfur plants.
Right.
I mean, it was. Yeah, we definitely were living in an environment that humans were not meant to be camping in, sleeping in, billeted in. The challenge was keeping soldiers out of trouble, giving them a mission, and letting them know that, hey, you're not wasting your time.
Right.
Even though they were, we knew they were wasting their time.
Right.
You have left home for a year. Our unit, in particular, more than half of us, I think it was 55% of us, were divorced or separated by the time we came home, or within just a few months of coming home. That was a heavy toll. And although we didn't lose soldiers over there outside, 10, I think, was the unit that we had up north. We lost about 10 soldiers, but out of 3,500, I don't like talking about soldiers as statistics, but we did really well as a unit, going over and coming back with most of our people. The challenge was when we got home. We lost soldiers who were murdered, killed in reckless accidents, because now the gloves are off. We can go drink, we can go drive as fast as we want, we can do the things that we want. But then the worst was suicide. And we both have lost a lot of soldiers, a lot of friends to suicide. We're still at about 17, 18 a day that are taking their lives, that are veterans. Who's helping them? Where are soldiers getting help, and how do they get help? Did the Army do enough to help us when we came back?
Yeah, for sure not, and for sure still not. And I heard a statistic recently. I was just at a conference, with a veterans group called Veteran Rights, RITES, not RIGHTS. That they had a speaker there who's involved with mental health with the VA, and I want to say she said that it often takes up to 9 months just for someone to get in to see a mental health professional, a veteran.
On the VA side?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And I think there's multiple things that contribute to that. One is the burnout from COVID. I think every aspect of the healthcare industry had a high burnout factor, and there just aren't enough providers. Then the other, of course, is budget. But demand certainly greatly outstrips supply. There are civilian groups, a number of civilian groups that are tackling this. The group I'm involved with, again, Veteran Rights, just got a huge grant from the VA. It's called the Staff Sergeant Fox Grant, which is specifically for suicide prevention. And it's funneling money out into civilian and veterans groups that have demonstrated an ability to help veterans cope with whatever it is they have going on and keep them from taking that final step, and giving them some tools to try to work their way out of this mental process that is very difficult to break. But there's never been enough. It's quite possibly worse now than it's ever been.
That's rough.
And yeah, a lot of it, and I think a lot of it has to do, but of course there's a lot to do with the bureaucracy, but also there is a great shortage of providers. From personal experience, I think I went to 3 different therapists. The first one was completely incompetent. The second one, he was stuck on, I liked him, but he was stuck on EMDR, and EMDR wasn't doing anything for me, so I eventually just quit going to him. The third one was actually pretty good.
Sorry, for folks that don't know, EMDR.
EMDR is a mode of treatment that uses lights and sound. I don't even remember what the acronym stands for now. It's a very common and often effective mode of treatment, but it didn't work for me. And this provider was stuck on that, and I know he had other modes, but he just was not willing to come out of that. So I stopped going to him. But my point being that there's not only a shortage of providers, there is a shortage of competent or effective providers. And just because you get in to see a provider doesn't mean that it's going to help.
A lot of times after we come home, and the Guard's different than active duty because we're not all based at Fort Lewis. We're not all based at Camp Murray.
Right.
We're not, we live in the communities throughout the state. So we lose that sense of community that we just had for a year. And then go back into our communities, a lot of times by ourselves. It may not be anybody else from our unit in our town or in the Guard in our town. Have you seen anything that has helped with Guard members stay connected, build community since they got out?
There are a number of veterans organizations, even informal ones, that do a pretty good job of that, I would say, in a lot of instances. Again, there's a supply and demand issue. There was a program called Guitars for Vets that I went out on a trip in Eastern Washington for 12 days with a group of veterans with veterans' rights, and we were basically we were out dispersed camping in the desert. It was a small group, and it was part of a vision fast process that was developed back in the 70s. And I'm still in contact with almost all of those people, and it was very effective for all of us. So that works. But again, and it's hard to get into. I lucked out. There was a cancellation. I was able to get in fairly quickly. But I got back from that in September of last year, and I was concerned about getting through the winter mentally and emotionally. And a couple of people that I was out in the desert with had gone through Guitars for Vets, which is, you get 10 guitar lessons, and then at the end of it, after you graduate, they give you a guitar. So that sounds like something that'll keep me busy for the winter. So as soon as I got back, I put in an application, and they said, well, we're pretty backlogged. You might get in January. Well, here we are going into April, and I still have, and I know I'm still on the roster. I'm still on the list. My number hasn't come up yet. So there's a huge issue of supply and demand. There are more people that need something. I hesitate to call it services. There's just not enough to go around. And if you're in a situation where you're semi-remote geographically from the general population, it's even worse.
That's because I know being from Lewis County, living up here in Kitsap County, even though I'm kind of out in the boonies, I know that there's still some organizations that are 30 minutes away, which is not too bad as long as I have the gas to do it. But man, some communities you're an hour like to the closest resource, maybe more. Right. I think about the people that live like in Packwood, Washington.
Yeah, for sure.
It's I want to say like an hour and a half to Chehalis and Centralia, and I just found out that they had closed their VA clinic.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, like 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I realized I've been home for a while, but that was still kind of a kick in the shins when I found that out, because I know they're saying that you can go another 30 minutes up to Olympia, but when you've already drove an hour and a half, and now your appointment's going to be however long, and another 2 hours to get back home, that there's nothing quick or easy about that.
They're also closing the Olympia clinic, and I think it's because they're either renovating the building or they're moving to a new building, but I believe what I heard was they were going to be shut down for at least a year. And here's the other side of that. Again, supply and demand. I used what's called the mobile medical unit for primary care when I was living in Shelton because it was convenient. And basically they have a retrofitted motorhome that they use as a clinic space, and they travel around to some of these outlying communities. And you can only get basic care, but it's better than driving to American Lake. So when I was in Shelton, I had been using that for primary care. When we moved to Pierce County, I went to get back into American Lake. American Lake's not taking new patients. So they sent me to Silverdale, which is a little over an hour from my place. Well, I just recently found out that Silverdale now is also not taking new patients. So where do people go? They community care if you can make it work, but it doesn't always work that great.
I have been over 5 years now trying to get into Silverdale because after I left Chehalis, I tried transferring up here, and then COVID hit, and I wasn't able to get into my appointment, and I will say that they helped me with the community care.
Right.
So that my hip was, those that don't know, I was ran over, had an injury. It's been years in the process, but finally I had osteonecrosis and the bone was dying, and it was a combination of the impact and other things, but they gave me physical therapy, and when they realized that physical therapy wasn't working, physical therapy said, hey, you need an MRI on this. My doctor from my work I could not get it approved for an MRI. It was VA medically related, so VA was actually able to get me to an MRI, and that's when they realized that, oh, you need your hip replaced. That was about a year-long process, so I'm not knocking it. It happened faster than if I had not been on the community care and just went through the straight VA process, I would have been another year waiting for my surgery in, I believe, Seattle. So it's this 6 of one and a half dozen of another.
It's never enough. Ever. I've never seen an instance of where there's enough. And it's a travesty, and what can you do? I mean, and we're back to suicide, and that's a big contributor to that.
It's men's health in general, but I noticed that it tends to be some of the things that I noticed were guard soldiers typically had a harder time, whether it was employment, whether it was suicide, just surviving in life out there, because that there was something about that part-time community was not enough for them, and yet for others it was the greatest thing that ever happened.
Right.
I mean, I probably met some of the greatest friends and teachers and examples. I would not have been the NCO that I was if I had not met you. Although could be angry, grumpy, it was still probably one of the most satisfying things working with, you start off early with a squad of maybe 4, and then eventually I was up to a platoon level element, and I was a section chief, so I would fill in for the platoon sergeant a lot. And when you're working with 44 individuals and you're doing NCOERs on 10 individuals, there is something satisfying about helping these soldiers progress to the next level. You helped a lot of us. What satisfaction did you get in that process? I mean, what was your best day in that process?
I enjoyed witnessing the successes, I think, probably more than anything, and witnessing the growth in individual soldiers. Josh Pratt always comes to mind for me. I was his recruiter. Here's another thing. I was in recruiting for a couple of years, and I ended up deploying with some of the soldiers that I enlisted, which is unusual. And none of them were pissed, which made me happy. And that was very gratifying in itself. Watching young soldiers grow up, and becoming mature adults, all that stuff I think was most gratifying for me. I have to admit, by the time I was done with my stint as a platoon sergeant, I was frickin' tired. It's probably the most personally rewarding time during my career was as a platoon sergeant. But man, I was tired when it was done. And so often I felt like a babysitter. But I mean, there's two sides to it. But really, looking back, it was a great time. I loved it. We were training out. I remember specifically training in Yakima, and the battery commander was dead set on us staying in the battery area to do CTT when we had missions off site, and it just didn't make sense. And I had to fight constantly to keep my guys out of that nonsense. Not that CTT is not important, but it made no sense. And I ran myself ragged during that FTX. I was running them chow, and it was insane. I was very grumpy during that time. I was getting maybe 4 hours sleep a night for a couple of weeks, and but looking back on it, it was a great time. I love it. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
I remember not only you in the field, but I remember you being the reason that we got food, because we had lost whoever our section sergeant was back in those days was either gone or non-existent. I remember he actually would not tell us when our fuel missions were, and we would go, and yourself and Staff Sergeant Sandlin at the time, with the he was with the maintenance
right.
Platoon, and you two were the biggest reason we got fed, because our own section sergeant didn't think it was important, or didn't realize that it was his responsibility
right.
to make sure that we were fed, and because we were fuelers, and this is back when we still had MOGAS and JP8, the cooks became our friends almost immediately, because we would fuel up their generators whenever they needed them, whenever
right.
they get the call. And so they started hooking us up with like mermaids. We would have coffee in the field when nobody else would. We'd have fresh loaves of bread and apples when nobody else did. It was we learned that there, even in the military, there was a trade and barter system that wasn't really on the books. And but as somebody who was cold and hungry a few times, thank you, because you actually got us. You did what an NCO was supposed to do. You took care of your troops, and those were things that I always tried to remember and carry on as I was trying to move up the chain. But a lot of soldiers remember that, and a lot of soldiers remember how you helped them with certain tasks that nobody else would. You could get us the answer when nobody else could. Now I'm gonna stop building you up here for a minute. We're gonna get we are at life after the war.
Okay.
What was the biggest change for you when we came home?
The biggest, so my wife had multiple chronic illnesses. I'll try to keep this short. So prior to the deployment, you already spoke about how we knew it was coming and it kept getting delayed. And I tried many times to express to my wife that she needed to, her horse thing was a business. It wasn't just a hobby. I tried to express to her a number of times that she needed to scale that back, because there was going to be a time when I wasn't here to help. And being the stubborn person she was, she didn't want to give that up, and didn't. And things at home fell apart during the deployment, to the point that I signed a power of attorney, sent it home so she could let the property go on a short sale, because that's how bad things fell apart. So I flew home on R&R. She had sold the house, got rid of the horses, got rid of all the trailers, all the stuff. I flew home on R&R and moved her into a duplex in town, and then went back into theater. So that and things with her continued to go downhill while I was gone. And my role during that time began to transition from provider to caregiver. And she never fully recovered, and she passed away last year finally. She was very ill. The other side of it was that all these things we've already discussed about how worse things were in Kuwait than they really needed to be because of the command climate. General Tony, you may remember this, came and visited us to see what was going on because he was getting word about all this stuff back in the States. He came over to visit our unit specifically to find out what the hell was going on. So he showed up, showed his face, shook the hands of the troops, hung out at the dining facility, and expressed that some things were going to change. When we went back through the demo process at the SRP site, he showed up and gave a little speech and handed out a bunch of questionnaires. I'm sure you remember that. Asking specifically what happened, and it was, the motivation for the thing was retention. Obviously they were afraid that there was going to be a mass exodus, which ultimately there was. But so he showed up, gave a speech, had a retention NCO hand out these questionnaires, and encouraged people to be frank on the questionnaires. When we were back in the armory, the retention NCO happened to be up at the copy machine at the same time I was, and had this big stack of questionnaires that he was told to make copies of so he could give the originals to General Tony's office and keep the rest for, keep the copies for recruiting and retention. And he got a phone call, and he was under the gun to get something done. So I volunteered to make copies for him so he could go take care of whatever he needed to handle. Well, of course, I started reading these things because I wanted to know what people had to say. And it was bad.
You must have read mine. He must have read.
He did. It was bad, and everybody on the battalion command team was named by name multiple times in these questionnaires. That many times. All of the field grades, with the exception of the chaplain and the sergeant major, who I greatly admired as a first sergeant. I loved the hell out of that man as a first sergeant, but he failed us as a sergeant major. Anyway, I went through, so I read probably just about every one of those questionnaires, and General Tony had promised that he was going to fix all this stuff. Well, not only did he not fix it, every one of those field grade officers that were named by name were in short order promoted after we got back. And that was, I was done at that point. I mean, not that I was retired on active duty, but, and I don't think that my work ethic changed or that my soldier care changed, but my attitude towards the organization did a complete 180. And I don't, mentally, I never recovered from that. I was done.
You've been out how many years now?
Now, 16.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
Wow.
weird. It doesn't feel like it.
I'm already 5. Like it,
Yeah.
and it doesn't. I just time is on fast forward since I took off the uniform.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
but now everything we've gone through, everything you've gone through, young person comes up to you today and says, "Hey, I'm I'm thinking about the military." What would you tell them?
I would tell them, unless if you're doing it for employment, if you're doing it for educational benefits or those kind of things, um, look at other options first. Because in a lot of instances, it's just not worth the trade off. Um, I would say if you're just dead set that you want to be in the military and that's your thing, and you think you're gonna love the lifestyle and love that service, then by all means, take a look across all the branches, and if one feels like a good fit, then go give it a try. But for anybody else, I would say it's a last option only. I wouldn't recommend it.
Did you?
And for young people, here's what happens. This was even common when I enlisted. Um, Young people often enlist with the intention of doing, their 3 or 4 years, whatever they sign up for, getting what they want out of it, and then moving on. But a lot of life happens in those few years. Um, Pregnancies, marriages, DUIs.
Mm.
When I was on active duty, I literally knew a guy who had planned on ETSing, got a DUI a couple of months before he was due to ETS, and didn't have a driver's license. So if you don't have a driver's license, what are you going to do for a job? So he reenlisted.
Wow.
But that's how people get stuck. Plans don't always work out.
Did you benefit at all from like the VA loan or GI Bill or those?
We bought one place on a VA loan, and if you just don't have a down payment, it's a good deal. If you can afford a down payment with a conventional loan, especially if you can come up with 20%, it's not necessarily that great of a deal. Because the more you borrow, the higher your payment's going to be. I mean, it's a benefit if you have down payment issues. If you have the down payment, it's not necessarily a good deal. So, I mean, we did it once. I probably wouldn't do it again. And some states do direct loans to veterans. Oregon and California, Texas. I think there are a couple of others, and they have great interest rates.
Texas seems to have like everything for.
Yeah.
I was impressed. The last mobilization was in and out of Fort Hood, and just as a state and as a community, they had all sorts of things for their
Texas
soldiers.
has great state benefits for veterans.
Is it something that we need to work with our congressmen at state level here? Like, are there things that we should be telling our senators and our congress folks, like hey, this is where you're failing your soldiers?
Yeah. For as much military as we have in this state, and there's a lot, I think Washington could do a better job of veterans benefits that are funded by the state. I mean, I've had a state parks pass forever and used the hell out of it. I can't tell you how many times I've camped for free in state parks.
I finally got the lifetime one.
Yeah.
That was nice.
I just oyster season is going out by my place, and I hadn't bought a fishing license in a couple of years, but I was still in the system as a disabled veteran. I went online to buy a license so I could get a couple of limits in before the fishing season flips over, which is the end of this month. So I was only going to get a couple of limits in, but it was $11 for a license. You know, that's in Washington. Disabled veterans get freshwater, saltwater, and shellfish for, I think it's $11.30.
Okay, my big brother keeps hammering me about that because he knows that that's one of the benefits that we get. I have never done it. I usually spend between 70 and 100 something dollars a year.
And there's I think hunting license might be 50%. I don't hunt, so I don't know, but I know there's a benefit there also.
Where do I go to get that benefit? How do I get that benefit?
The best resource to research those benefits, and usually it instructs you on how to apply for them, is the WWII website. That's Washington Department of Veterans Affairs, and I won't swear to it, but it might be WWII.org.
I will definitely eventually try to get that into a clip or onto a link.
I also used post 9/11 GI Bill. I hadn't planned on it, but I lost my employment. I had been working with a software company from home for 4 years, and the owner of the company, with like 2 weeks notice, decided to shut the business down. And I was, how am I going to replace this income? Especially at my age, age discrimination, the employment marketplace is a real thing. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I decided to use my GI Bill, and I got the stipend, plus I worked at WWII as a work study, and I didn't replace all the income, but I probably replaced half of it just going back to school. So that was a good deal for me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, because a big thing that we're trying to do is to explain to any of the soldiers out there, hey, these are some of the benefits that are still out there for you, besides the free meal on Veterans Day at Denny's.
I've never done that, by the way.
Oh, you are missing out. Now I can get the senior slam. I get the senior discount. Oh, you're probably used to that. What do you do for self-care? We talked a little bit about the hiking, and getting out, but
that's the most of it. I've found meditation to be extremely helpful. I would say anything that gets me out of my head is good therapy. Anything. But really, being outdoors and meditation are the two things that have saved my ass, really.
Right on.
And meditation I learned in college. That was another side benefit of that GI Bill. I took a psychology class from a Tibetan monk.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And in that, part of his deal was at the start of every class, we did meditation.
No, that would be called prayer in school, and we know that's illegal.
So, okay. Well, you know what? You're right. And that's how the way they get around it is it's a psychology class. They can't call it Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever the flavor.
It's a shame some of the things that we can't make some pockets for that are proven beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of them. I'm not Catholic, but I went to a Catholic school, St. Martin's down in Olympia,
Mm-hmm.
Lacey, and one of those practices, the Lent's going on right now, and one of the things that I really appreciated was the giving up something for Lent. And this year I chose a couple of things that were may not seem like anything to anybody else, but it was amazing just giving up those two things, how it changed not only the amount of time I had to do other things, like my Bible reading increased, my prayer time increased, and my focus on attempting to do a YouTube channel just became so much more clear. And whether this is my last episode or one of the next 1,000, just that simple practice of giving up some things for a little time. You don't have to give them up forever,
Right.
but just a disciplined giving up of something, and it just changed my whole focus and spiritual attitude.
That's great.
Props to my Catholic friends out there. You're not, it's from your Anabaptist friend. I appreciate it.
So this thing I went out on in the desert last fall with veteran rights is, I'd say a lot of it is Native American spirituality inspired. But we had, I'd say, probably 60% of the guys I was out with were practicing Christians. One of them Catholic, I think the rest Protestant, and they're all kind of in that same boat. And we still talk online. One of them yesterday was relating his experience to Scripture. I guess my point is that it wasn't a faith-based thing, but there were definitely active members in the Christian community who took part in it, who found value in it. No one's going to convert me, but I appreciate it for sure. Appreciate how the same process affected them and how they relate it to their faiths and integrate that stuff together. It's incredible.
I again, sorry to keep propping up the Catholics on this, but I remember Thomas Merton was one of the writers that we read on his works, and him talking about Buddhism, even though he was Catholic, and when he went through that process, he said it made him a better Catholic just by learning from the Buddhist. And I always admired that piece of it. I mean, my faith background is completely different from both, but well, we can get into the similarities between Protestants and Catholics, but it was always those people that, if we only learn from our own, if we only learn from the sources that we have, if we don't look at what are the good things in common, I think we miss out on a lot in life. I think working with the Muslims over in Kuwait taught me so much. Taught me the differences. Taught me that, oh wow, they love their family too. They're not everybody is there to come blow up America. That was such an eye opening. I really had this shallow view, and by the time I left, I was honestly hoping that they were safe, that they were okay, that they weren't, that the next regime wasn't going to wipe them out or wipe out their village or their just the things that I worry about are probably not what the typical person's worried about, but I really appreciated my time with them. And when I got into the jail chaplaincy, it helped me a lot dealing with other religions and other faiths, and I've shared this a couple of times, but the greatest compliment I ever got were two Muslim men who, and I apologize, I don't remember what country they were from, but I brought them their prayer rugs and crayons so that they could have them to read. And you know the difference between practicing Muslims and those that are just like Christians, kind of winging it. They didn't use their prayer rugs as a rug to make their cell look better. They actually used them for prayer, put them back up. And the statement that the one man said to me always stuck with me. He goes, I don't know what Christians are supposed to be like, but I think you are one. And that was a huge compliment to me. I mean, that just, I was like, wow, all right. If somebody from another religion can see my faith and see that I'm living it, that's like the greatest compliment you can get. So anyway, I'll get off that.
I've always appreciated that about you, and I remember instances on social media when you were filling backpacks with food and hiking around to the homeless camps and feeding the homeless in Lewis County, and how much crap you took from members of your faith online over doing that. And I was appalled. I couldn't imagine it. I have a great admiration for you for doing that, for taking that heat and for continuing to do it, and for the attitude you have and still embracing those people that attacked you.
It's I don't know. I think the Lord had to do a lot of adjusting in me. Mm-hmm. I think our deployment was a big help in that sense. The things that we went through there, kind of getting to come back home when so many people didn't.
Right.
It was. I think God answered a lot of personal prayer just by letting me come back home, and I did my best to try to follow through with what I promised when I came home. And even today, it's kind of nice. I still get to work in a sense with the homeless community. It was people who have been homeless for years, some of them for 10, 15 years, but they're now housed. And that's such a blessing, getting to work in that environment now. But my heart still goes out every time I drive by and see a tent village or tarp set up, because I know what's going on.
Right.
I know what's happening there, and it's rough. So I appreciate that. Thank you. As I start getting towards the end of things, are there 3 books that you would recommend, or a podcast, something that the folks out there should?
Tribe, by, I believe the author's name is Sebastian Unger, talks a lot about these things we've talked about. It's one of the books I most see recommended to veterans to try to help them wrap their heads around what has happened to them. That is the only one that immediately comes to mind.
Is there anyone you're listening to on?
Not really. God
and Country.
I guess what I would recommend is following your gut and paying attention to what is presented to you in the moment, and follow those threads, and you'll find what you need.
Right on. That's especially nowadays.
Yeah.
It's what's one question that I didn't ask you that you wish I would have asked?
I don't like to talk, so none.
Well, I want to say thank you for your service. Thank you for coming here and being a friend and mentor all these years. I know you're looking at greener pastures and warmer areas. So in the time that I have, just thank you for everything.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for the service that you're doing by producing these podcasts. I think the more information that can get out there, I think the better.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brian.
Everybody out there, thank you for your service. And welcome to God and Country. Have a good one.